we turn to the Mercedes-Benz Vans phone line and finally hook up with somebody who's been working like crazy for all my compadres at the NFL Media Group. One of our top insiders, and certainly one in the top insiders in the business on the Mercedes-Benz Vans phone line, is Tom Pelissero. How you doing, Tom?
Rich, it's, what do we got here? About 2 o'clock Eastern time. There's not been an emergent situation today for me to go on TV for 4 straight hours.
How about that?
So I'm holding my breath, but I'm glad that I was able to pick up on the first ring this time.
Look at us, Tom. Look at us, how we've evolved. Are you in Canton, or where are you, Tom?
I'm in Philadelphia. I drove here from Pittsburgh last night, and I'll be heading on to the Jets camp next. 13 teams in 13 days. Doesn't get any better than that.
I love it. Okay, so let's take them one at a time. What is going on in Pittsburgh? You know, and you got to, at this time of year, be very careful what you're reading and blogging and live blogging of practices. But for all accounts, nobody's lighting things up. Or Mason Rudolph has the lead based on the play that we've seen or reporters are talking about in practice. What did you glean from Pittsburgh?
If the Steelers had to play a game tomorrow, it's a pretty good bet Mitch Trubisky would be the starting quarterback. But they don't play a game tomorrow, and they're going to take their time sorting this thing out. You very rarely have a true three-way quarterback battle, but from everyone I spoke to when I was in Pittsburgh, it sounds like that's legitimately how they're approaching it. Mitch Trubisky got all the first-team reps through the first week of camp. Yesterday, Trubisky and Mason Rudolph split the first-team reps. I was told that was a pre-planned rotation. They've also been moving Kenny Pickett around. He was with the third team initially. Then they moved him up to the second team where he played better, which makes sense because he didn't have as much pressure on him, even in the no-hitting the quarterback setting of training camp. But I caught up with Mike Tomlin when he was coming off our NFL Network set, and I just asked him, are you going to have to give each of these guys a preseason start? And what he said was, I don't care about when they play. I just care about them being able to function no matter what's going on around them. In other words, they're going to mix it up. They're going to look at everybody with the first team and the second team and the third team. Right now, Deontay Johnson just signed his contract, so he'll be back at practice. But Chase Claypool's been out. Pat Freiermuth has been out. Najee Harris has been banged up of late. So, there's been a lot of challenges for those quarterbacks. Has anyone stepped forward and grabbed the job yet? No, but it's early in camp. And the Mason Rudolph thing is real. He has flashed in camp. He's had a solid camp. They've obviously got the most book on him in terms of what he is as a quarterback. But let's see how this thing evolves. It's going to be one of the fun on-the-field storylines through the course of the preseason. And
then now you're in Philadelphia. What's the story there for this Philadelphia Eagles team that has Jalen Hurts at the controls for a full season now for a second season, a run game that now could be supported by an aerial attack featuring A.J. Brown? Is that it? Is that the story, or is it on defense? What do you got for me, Tom?
That's a huge part of it, is bringing in A.J. Brown. I mean, A.J. Brown, I don't have many favorites in the league, but as a guy and a player, I love everything about A.J. Brown. He came on with me and Sean O'Hara for NFL Network after practice. Jalen Hurts crashed the interview, so we talked to the two of them together. They're buddies. They've known each other a long time, and those two plus Devontae Smith spent a bunch of time together between mini camp and training camp, working out together. AJ posted some photos of them like running hills in the rain and stuff like that. Like, they're all tight, so you've got some just natural chemistry there. But then watching, AJ Brown duking it out with Darius Slay in one-on-ones in practice, they've got some star power on this team. They've got some really talented players. You're hoping that some of the the older veterans, the Jason Kelce's and the Fletcher Coxes, can give you one more run here. That's why they're taking their shot. I would also say that they're cautious about people pumping them up as one of the favorites at this point. I don't think that nationally that's how they're perceived, but anytime that you have a first-year head coach who finishes hot and makes the playoffs like Nick Sirianni did, there's always that danger that then if you don't start hot again the following season, it's, well, what's wrong? Especially when they went out and got Brown and they got James Bradbury. They've really added a lot of talent, and they also added, I'm not kidding you, Rich, in all my time covering the NFL, I can name on one hand the number of humans I've seen bigger than Jordan Davis, their first-round pick out of Georgia. He was standing next to Fletcher Cox, and Fletcher Cox looks small. Fletcher Cox is one of the biggest humans I've ever seen in the league, too. So it'll be fascinating to see a guy that athletic and that big, what he can do as a rookie.
Tom Pelissero, my colleague from the NFL Media Group and insider, right here on the Rich Eisen Show. Let's jump headfirst into the Deshaun Watson appeal of Sue L. Robinson's 6-game suspension. Walk me through what the NFL's thinking is now and what happens next, Tom.
Well, the NFL's thinking in filing the appeal is, for one thing, they can. They usually defend their rights within the CBA. It is their right within the CBA, and the union has it to appeal any suspension. And then the second part of it is they wanted they pushed for a minimum 1-year banishment with the possibility of reinstatement in 2023. And when they filed their appeal brief against the NFLPA's very publicly stated wishes, they once again asked for the same thing, which is an indefinite suspension of at least 1 year with the possibility of conditional reinstatement in 2023. They've also wanted to substantially fine Deshaun Watson because the way that his contract is structured, which is a common structure, but big signing bonus, which doesn't count for a suspension, minimum base salary. They want him to have to pay a monetary price as well. And that's where, the settlement talks got hung up. We're on both fronts. Those go back to within the hearing. Once it became clear, as I've been talking about for several weeks here, it would have shocked anyone who was involved with the hearing if they got 1 year from Sue L. Robinson because of the way that she addressed her narrow powers as disciplinary officer under the collective bargaining agreement. She's not permitted to rewrite precedent. She's not permitted to rewrite the CBA or the personal conduct policy. She can work off of what exists. The NFL's argument was, well, there is no precedent for what we say Deshaun Watson did. The NFLPA would say you have to go off the precedent, and therein lies the disagreement. The NFL was willing to settle both back in July or early July and last week prior to the disciplinary decision for less than a year and a hefty fine. Deshaun Watson, who, for better or worse, has denied all wrongdoing in these cases, was not willing to accept it. So the 6-game suspension comes in, the NFL appeals. Roger Goodell gets to a point who hears that appeal. History suggests it'll be somebody else within the league office. And then if they can't work out a settlement prior to that disciplinary or the appeal hearing, which is no sooner than next week and until a decision is rendered, then in all likelihood, you're going to have an increase in the suspension up to or as high as 1 year minimum banishment. And then the NFLPA in all likelihood will then sue in federal court. And then one thing I've learned covering enough cases in federal court here is once things leave the collectively bargained process and go into the court, everyone loses control of the timeline.
So what would the timeline be? Would it wind up from what you're hearing in Watson playing while this gets hammered out, or he sits the first 6 games and then this thing needs to be decided before week 7 hits and the Browns are in a state of limbo through the first month and a half of the season?
As our colleague Judy Batista put it well on Good Morning Football today, it is murky. It seems unlikely that Deshaun Watson would be playing in week 1 since, in essence, he has accepted a 6-game suspension. However, this is a new disciplinary process. It is not played out before at any level, including the courts, but also at the actual CBA-dictated disciplinary officer and appeals level. And so it's hard to make a firm prediction, just like everything else within the course of this process. What we do know is history will tell you if a player is suspended for a minimum, banished for a minimum 1 year, they're also not allowed to participate in training camp. So now you have a possibility, since the NFL and the NFLPA and everyone involved is supposed to have this heard on an expedited basis. Let's say next Friday, just throwing out a date. Mm-hmm. It's not going to happen this week. The PA still has to respond. Let's say next Friday, they come down and say Deshaun Watson is now banished for a year. If they're going off how they've always treated these cases, he's immediately out of camp. He can't participate in the preseason. And that's where that would accelerate the time frame for the NFLPA then to go to federal court and try to get a temporary restraining order to get him back into camp in the preseason. Would a judge then say he can play week 1? Again, it seems unlikely. It most likely would be, okay, it's 6 games was agreed to. It's anything on top of that we have to look at here. But we just don't know because the process hasn't played out before.
Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. What's your reporting on how the league investigated Stephen Ross and came up with, that he was kind of not to be taken seriously when he was trying to order a tank job but he definitely 100%, along with another member of his ownership team, go after Brady and Sean Payton in a way that was so brazen they took away 2 draft choices and $1.5 million Stephen Ross dollars. What's your reporting there?
In terms of the tanking allegation, if Stephen Ross, in fact, offered $100,000 to lose games, you would think there'd probably be a paper trail if he paid off on that. Absent 11, I believe it was, losses in that season, 11 $100,000 payments into Brian Flores' bank account, it's difficult to prove what the intentions were. We know what Brian Flores said, which was it was a serious offer. We know that Stephen Ross has said in very clear terms that the allegations were false and defamatory. It's a tricky one, Rich, because you're talking about what people implied in conversations, though they didn't occur in front of other people. But the fact that came out at the same time as the findings in the tampering investigation is certainly not an accident. Whatever mistake Stephen Ross did, and the NFL made clear, you shouldn't talk the way he did, even if it's in jest. No one can know. You can't say that stuff. But it gives the appearance that the discipline that was laid out in terms of the first-round pick in 2023, third-rounder in 2024, the fine, the suspension, even though Stephen Ross can still attend games, that was all strictly from the tampering allegation. And only the league office truly knows how they arrived at those specific penalties. What we do know is that is major discipline that is up there with the stiffest discipline that we have seen, certainly for an owner, but for a club to lose 2 prime picks like that in recent NFL history. And it was, talking paper trails, it's a lot easier to track. Tom Brady was talking to Bruce Beal and Stephen Ross on a regular basis, and apparently Sean Payton had contact with them as well. You got text messages, you got phone records, everything else. And if anybody knows that they have to turn over their phone in an NFL investigation, it's probably Tom Brady. I'm not saying he did.
Good one.
I'm just saying we know throwing your phone is something that's not looked upon kindly by the NFL.
Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. All right, so now it appears, certainly with Deontay Johnson, is everybody paid? Are there any other lingering issues somewhere other than Jimmy Garoppolo as an outstanding issue? If so, what are they? And then hit me on what's going on with Garoppolo and where he might wind up. What do you got for me, Tom?
Those are the big ones. Derwin James is still a hold-in at this point. That's going to be one to watch. So is Russell Wilson. He's participating and doing everything. He's got 2 years left on his contract. But at some point, the Broncos, they have been looking at this. They have been speaking with his agent. It's just a matter of does something get done at a time that Deshaun Watson's 5-year, $230 million fully guaranteed contract is that target that everybody is aiming for. In terms of Jimmy Garoppolo, continues to sound like everything is going well from a rehab perspective. There's just not a team jumping to the forefront right now to make a trade for a guy who is still working his way to the, back to fully 100% and hasn't thrown in a team setting since he underwent shoulder surgery back in late February, early March. Is it possible he gets traded? Well, it's possible there's a quarterback or two who get hurt in the next few weeks here. But with each passing day, it certainly raises the chances that Jimmy Garoppolo, at the end of this, sometime around cutdown day, ends up getting released because otherwise the 49ers are carrying a $20-odd million salary on their books for a backup quarterback. They've made very clear Trey Lance is the guy, barring an injury to Trey Lance, which, again, always possible. He got hurt a couple times last year when he played. But barring that, their hands are a little bit tied as we get down to it here, and we just have to see whether or not there's some type of situation that generates a market for Garoppolo.
And speaking of not throwing for, in team activities right now, you got the defending world champion quarterback and Matthew Stafford. What's the concern level there with Stafford here in Los Angeles, Tom?
Well, I would say on Stafford, he deals with so much. He has so many injuries. He's not the youngest guy anymore, obviously. And you watch him play, Rich. I mean, he takes hits. He's always got, a banging a thumb on a helmet or something. So he's been dealing with this tendon issue in his throwing elbow that's just been limiting him here. You never want to hear a quarterback with elbow issues in the first week of camp, but they'll manage him just like they did through last year when he was dealing with a variety of different stuff. And if anybody's going to rise to the bell come that September 8th opener, it's Matthew Stafford.
All right, Tom Pelissero, thanks for the time. Travel safe. Let's do this again when on the back end of Canton. Thanks very much, sir.
Thanks, Rich.
You got it. At Tom Pelissero on Twitter, a must follow. I follow him. You should as well.